All right. Some things need to be addressed. The College Football Playoff Selection Committee has done what they do. This is Break Panel Sports. We're going to break this down right here on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you're listening to this show. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm John McCooch. We're going to talk about some college football. A lot has happened. A lot has gone down. Hasn't gone the way that most people, I guess, expected it to, or the way most people wanted it to happen. But the College Football Playoff Committee got together. We had some results over championship games. Florida State ended up winning the ACC. Alabama ended up winning the SEC championship. Texas won the Big 12 by a good margin. So that means Georgia ended up losing a game. Ohio State left out, obviously. They lost their path to the college football playoff. Georgia, they lost their path to the college football playoff. And then it really just ended up coming down to this final three for the fourth spot because Washington went undefeated. They ended up beating Oregon, unlike the way I thought it was going to go down. Michigan ended up winning the Big Ten against Iowa by a good margin, so that's two spots locked up. Then it really came down to, I guess, yes, it did come down to the 3 and the 4. We weren't too sure what was going to happen, but I think at the end of the day, most people expected Texas to be in there one way or another, whether you thought maybe, oh, well, Georgia's better, and I've said that. But at the end of the day, in terms of what they've done, I mean, Texas had beaten Alabama. Texas had beaten everybody except for Oklahoma on their schedule, who ends up pretty high in the ranking. So Texas was going to get in. And then it came down to Alabama, Florida State, and obviously if Bama just won the SEC championship against Georgia, they're probably not going to put in Georgia over Alabama. But I guess that logic, who knows what logic you're going to use with Texas and Alabama. But the playoff committee did value the head-to-head against Alabama with Texas, so they put them at 3. And they put, whoever at 4. They ended up putting Alabama in at 4. The SEC champion gets the 4th spot in the college football playoff. So that means an undefeated Power 5 conference champion Florida State ended up missing the playoff, even after wins against LSU, against Louisville, against Clemson. They end up missing the playoff in favor of an Alabama team that has had their struggles this season, that has barely beaten USF, that had barely beaten Auburn just a couple weeks prior. Need about 4th and 31 or whatever it was to beat Auburn. They were on the brink of losing that game, number 2, and Florida State would have been in the playoff if that miracle from Jalen Milroe never occurred. But here we are. We have the Georgia Bulldogs at 6, the Seminoles at 5. That's what we got. Now, I know what I said kind of alluded to the Florida State Seminoles maybe feeling like they were robbed. And if you saw anything that Mike Norvell said, head coach of Florida State, yeah, you would think, obviously Florida State's going to think they got robbed. Georgia feels like they did as well. They said that they're one of the best 4 teams, Kirby Smart, but nobody's really taking that one as seriously because, again, they're not a conference champion. Now, what it really came down to, and there's been a lot of debate on social media everywhere, the college football world, on ESPN, on wherever, about, okay, why was this decision made? Was this the correct decision? What precedent does this set for college football? And as we continue into the 12-team playoff, as we continue into super conferences and the eventual probable death of the ACC, maybe even the Big 12, the Pac-12 already out the door. Really, we're heading into a 4-conference era, which we all know what the road after that will lead to. 2 conferences as we get down to it. The ACC and Big 12 fighting for survival right now. And now you get a top 4 with all potential and future SEC and Big 10 teams. And Florida State's already been rumored to be joining the SEC. And after this decision, Florida State, yes, you have a 12-team playoff. You would have got in. But at this point, you got to ask, and this was the big conversation, why play the games? Now, for me, I was in support of Alabama getting into the college football playoff because, well, okay, yes, why play the games, right? Why should Florida State even step onto that football field if we could just sit there and at the beginning of the season go, wow, we know who the 4 quote-unquote best teams are. We know who the 4 most talented teams are. And you would just probably put in Michigan, Ohio State, Georgia, and Alabama. You could just go that route. But there's a certain white line to playing the games that you have to kind of draw across from. And it makes absolutely no sense to most people. And even to me, I don't fully understand it. Nobody does. I don't even think the committee really understands what line you play because, okay, Florida State, you value, what does the committee value, right? values Power 5 conference champions. It values winning games against the teams that are on your schedule against Power 5 opponents. And I think it rates most Power 5 teams the same, which is clearly not the case now that the SEC has gotten in with Alabama. And Florida State, again, beats everybody on their schedule, doesn't get in. Texas lost to Oklahoma. Texas, again, obviously they beat Alabama. Florida State has that LSU win. Alabama just beat Georgia, but they lost to Texas, who's also in the playoff with them. It makes interesting sense. Now, where do you go from there, right? Where do you go from having to make that decision? Where does Florida State go from having to make that call? The big thing here is that Florida State was very much low in terms of strength of schedule. And yes, strength of record, they were up there with everybody. But I don't think I just the committee doesn't seem to care as much about strength of record. It cares much more about strength of schedule, as we've seen today. And I think if you go the 4 best teams, you do have to play the games, but some games don't matter at that point. Some games don't help you. It also matters the way in which you win those games. Florida State has struggled mightily in a lot of games. Games against Clemson, games against other opponents, games against Louisville that we saw the night before. And I think the committee kind of sat down and said, okay, we watched these two teams play less than 24 hours prior. They had watched Florida State much more recently. They watched Florida State play in a 16-6 stinker against Louisville. Defensively, they showed plenty of promise, plenty of prowess, but then they had just watched that Alabama game. And for me, it was hard to watch both of those games, to look back on both of those games as well, and to see the performances on the football field and say that Alabama was not a better football team than Florida State. Because, again, they beat the number 1 team in the nation. The SEC champion had to find a way to get in. And if it was going to come down to Alabama and Florida State, and you, again, had watched both of these teams play, yes, you don't want to factor in Jordan Travis being out, but I guess the committee had enough time to watch how Florida State was without Jordan Travis. And you look at this team and you say, defensively, this team can step up there with anybody. And they do. And they play great. They're one of the best defenses in the entire country, arguably right up there with the best. But you watch Alabama, they're the full product. It's SEC football. They're a lot better on the field. They played a much tougher opponent than Florida State did. I mean, Georgia and Louisville, there's absolutely no comparison. Can we be real? Can we be honest? Right? When it comes to the SEC and the ACC, especially at the top, when it comes, you take the top teams in the SEC, that Alabama had to play a lot of them, and the top teams in the ACC, there's no comparison. You put Louisville in the ACC, they're fighting for bowl eligibility, not a 10-win team playing for the championship. And a lot of people did end up using the SEC is 4-6 against the ACC. Well, 2 of those games were South Carolina, who had a poor season, Vanderbilt being one of those games. And, there's ways to break it down, but when it comes to the teams at the top, they're better. Yes, Florida State beat LSU, which was a great win. That's why they're a top 5 team in the nation at the end of the day. And they are a top 5 team in the nation. They deserve the spot that they have. But you say, okay, well then we can keep cherry picking all we want, but you look at it and you say, okay, Louisville lost to Kentucky, an SEC team. That was the team that Florida State played for the ACC championship. Kentucky is a middle of the pack, not ranked SEC squad. And they beat the second best that the ACC had to offer. It was a good game, but Kentucky ended up winning that game. And it was a lot more recently than what we saw from a lot of the other games early in the season, what we saw from the Florida State LSU game. There we go. Right. So, we can look, it depends on what angle you want to take it. But at the end of the day, the SEC will always be better than the ACC. There's just no way to break it down. I fully acknowledge that this is a weaker year for the SEC. 100%. This is not the SEC that we're used to seeing. This is not the strong SEC. It's strong at the top, but it's usually very strong all the way throughout. They have so many ranked teams and teams that are possibly ranked. But compared to years past, this is not the SEC of old. This is not the college football of old. But the ACC does not compare. Again, the direct head-to-head is the direct head-to-head. I will acknowledge that. But when you take a look at everything And if you want to go, whatever route you want to go, you can make the case because of the direct record. You can make that case. And teams that have, been ranked in the SEC lost to ACC teams. That has happened. That happened. You can say Georgia Tech barely, was able, Georgia barely beat Georgia Tech, but also Ole Miss beat Georgia Tech by 20. So how much does that really matter at the end of the day if you want to break it down with the ACC, SEC? There's no debate in my head, right? So, okay, whatever. The ACC there's a clear margin of strength in the teams you play in your conference, and that matters to the committee. At the end of the day, Florida State maybe should have found a way to get in there. It's I think both can be true, right? That Alabama, you deserve to get in. You played well. You beat everybody besides the third best team in the nation, and there you go. But Florida State, it's also 100% valid and makes 100% sense to sit there and say, they're a Power 5 champion. How are you not in the playoff? This isn't UCF. This isn't some group of 5 team going undefeated. This is Power 5 football. What's the problem? I think they're both true. And I think it shows that the college football playoff needed to expand to 12 teams because the overall talent was getting better, especially, it used to be so dominant between 2 or 3 teams every year. It used to be just Clemson, Alabama, maybe Ohio State every now and then, maybe Oregon gets in. But now it's just so much better spread out. And you could say it's because of NIL. You could say whatever it's because, it's just the truth. It's better spread out, the talent. So there you go. Florida State, let's go back to them. They got robbed. I think it's fair to say, but I also don't think they should have gotten in. I think both can be true. That the teams that are in the top 4 deserve to get in, but Florida State also got robbed at the same time. But here's the thing. The committee did an interesting play because obviously you put Florida State at 5. They are going to play in the Orange Bowl against Georgia. It's the University of Georgia Bulldogs. That is who they are going to play in the Orange Bowl. Non-playoff team, not a top 4 team, the number 6 team in the nation. Florida State now has the chance to go win that game and go claim a national championship. And if they end up, again, they beat everyone. They beat the Georgia Bulldogs. They didn't play in the playoff. I understand that. But UCF claimed the national championship in 2017. And this would be a much tougher route than what UCF had to go out and take. Yes, strength of schedule, whatever. But this is, that LSU team is not this Georgia team that UCF faced in that bowl game. So they can go prove everybody wrong. That defense can go show up and play lights out. And I think Florida State's going to get a lot more people that will play in that bowl game that originally wouldn't play in that bowl game. Because if you sell to this team, hey, you're playing for a national championship, you're going to be able to, get more players to play. Georgia probably not going to have Brock Bowers, probably going to be missing guys on defense. They're a little banged up. They got some time to rest, but I just don't see a Brock Bowers playing in that game because of the NFL draft implications. Georgia's not playing for a natty. Florida State, they're playing for it. I think you have to consider that national championship legitimate because why would you not? A bunch of men in suits got together who have probably never stepped on a football field in any setting that any of these guys would have and said, yes, we think these 12, I believe it is, people said, oh yeah, Florida State should get in. But now Florida State can go out. They can go win the games that they're set to go win and get it done and go finish that perfect season and claim your championship. Give yourself some rings, hang the banner the same way UCF did. And this one will be respected because you did everything that you could have done in your control. They did everything they could have did, and they didn't get in. It's just the way the season went. This was the deepest season that we had in a long time. No matter what you did, something was going to go wrong. Somebody was going to get their feelings hurt. Somebody was going to be mad, no matter which way you crack the cookie. But Florida State has a chance to set their own trail, to blaze their own trail, to set their own path. They've got a chance at a national championship game. Now, At first, I was so on board with the way that the committee decided to make this decision. They decided, okay, we're going to value strength of schedule, even despite the loss. Florida State's strength of schedule just was not there. They didn't play the teams that they needed to play. The ACC kind of, didn't help them out as much as they should have. The ACC should have been better, and they did not provide enough quality opponents for Florida State to get into the playoff over Alabama, who just won the SEC, probably this year the third best conference in the nation, and they weren't able to provide enough help for Florida State to get into the playoff. Okay, cool. I sat there, I said, I'm very okay with this. I'm very on board with this because Alabama, I think, is better than Florida State. I don't think there's a way you can sit here and tell me that Florida State is a better football team than Alabama. I was okay with it. I was like, the committee, this is good logic. They got this right the one time. And then I look at something like the Liberty SMU situation. Liberty has not one of the lower ones like Florida State. They have the worst strength of schedule in the entire nation. They're right. They're done. Conference USA. They do not have a good strength of schedule by any stretch of the imagination. Yes, they beat New Mexico State twice, but that was their best game. And then you look at SMU, who ended up winning their conference against Tulane, who was ranked, in the top 20 basically all season long. They win the championship against them. They have 2 losses against Oklahoma and TCU, and the committee obviously has bias all the time about teams that have done well, and they've put in TCU before. Not a strong season for them, but they played them. And Liberty did not play a Power 5 team at all. They only played teams, in that group of 5 out of conference and all that. They didn't play a Power 5 team. And SMU basically got penalized for playing Power 5 opponents. It's not like they got blown out 49-0 by Oklahoma. It was a 29-11 game, and they were in it for basically the whole game. They played Oklahoma well. They are much better than Liberty. But Liberty ended up getting the nod over SMU to go play Oregon in the Fiesta Bowl. And this is where the committee kind of lost me, because if you're going to have logic, if you're going to pick things in the Power 5, if you're going to pick the top 4 a certain way, you have to be consistent. You have to put SMU in that Fiesta Bowl. So then this is where it started to feel like, okay, is the committee trying to speed track the death of the ACC by putting Alabama in? Again, all 4 teams are going to be SEC or Big Ten. Is that what you're doing here? Are you trying to send a message and say that, hey, we don't want the ACC to even exist. We want these power conferences. It's coming, and you're got to figure it out. They are pushing Florida State out of the ACC in this situation, and I wouldn't be surprised if within the coming weeks you're going to hear a lot more rumors and a lot more things that are going to, eventually not be rumors, but are going to be fact about teams leaving the ACC. Because you look at the rest of this conference, you look at Miami, you look at Clemson, you look at North Carolina, you look at obviously Florida State. They're not going to sit here and say, oh, let's go stay in this conference. They just watch their top team win every game in this conference and not get into the top 4. Because yes, now you're thinking about buys when it comes to the 12-team playoff. I know a lot of people like to say, now, okay, that doesn't really matter though, John, because Florida State still gets in a 12-team playoff scenario. Now they have to play a random game against Liberty, and who knows what happens when teams get on the field. Right? This matters. You go undefeated, you probably deserve a bye. But they didn't. They weren't able to get the bye because the conference was weak. So then, okay, Florida State can get to the SEC. The SEC probably still has some spots open. And the ACC, they added Cal, Stanford, SMU. So at that point, you've got to leave. You've got to find a way to get out of there. And that, again, that's where the committee just kind of lost me, because, okay, I was for I was for SMU getting in, and I was for the bowl game, and I was for Alabama getting in, because it's the same logic. You go with the best strength of schedule. They've played the best teams. They've played Power 5 opponents. They played stronger teams. They've beaten those opponents. They didn't beat Oklahoma. They didn't beat TCU. But the message that sends to SMU is, don't play those games. Schedule other opponents. You could have went undefeated because you didn't play Oklahoma, because you didn't want the challenge of playing Oklahoma, of playing TCU. Why schedule those games, buddy? Don't do it. So SMU, maybe in the future, they don't schedule those games. They just play in their conference, and they're leaving. So that's where the committee kind of lost me. And now I'm kind of seeing, again, I'm still in support of Alabama getting in, but the committee over the years has just been beyond inconsistent. They haven't been able to go back-to-back years really without making people angry, without not just some people on Twitter, but everybody. Every single person who watches this sport gets so beyond angry at what happens. And it's valid, because somebody gets taken away from a position of contending for a national championship, and teams that deserve to get that attention. And this is where I kind of just say, thank you for a 12-team playoff, because this would be the season. So that what would happen here is that Oklahoma would have been out. That's what would have happened because obviously of the group of five, Liberty would have been the 12 seed this year, and SMU would have been mad. But in terms of that debate, SMU is not winning a national championship if they get into a 12-team playoff, and Liberty is not winning a national championship if they get into a 12-team playoff. I think SMU is miles better. I think once they get to that quote unquote Power Five, then this wouldn't have been a problem if they won the ACC, or if they played well in the ACC even, and all that stuff. That's where you kind of get interesting because again, Oklahoma. I guess maybe Oklahoma fans probably would have said, "Oh, if you put us in, who knows what could have happened? You're missing Andrew Anthony. You're missing some players. It's not going to happen." At this point, players do enter their transfer portal, but I guess people would enter it later because again, you're playing on a team playing for a national championship. But to sit there and say that Oklahoma would have a very good shot beating, a run where they might have to take on Florida State and then play Alabama and then play Georgia, Michigan, whoever. It's tough to say, unless if they end up getting matched up against Texas because Oklahoma beat Texas. So maybe that's going to be the debate, but I don't think it's not going to be as heated. It's not going to be as dramatic as we had today after this college football committee made the decisions that they made. So it's a very, very tough time. A lot of people are saying this is a dark day for college football. And yes, it could be a dark day, but there's also new beginnings on the horizon. There's also a light at the end of this tunnel, and it's the 12-team playoff. And we're going to see how that all works. But let's go ahead and talk about the top four that we have here, what we got. Okay. Washington will play Texas. So Texas-Washington's going to be a tough one. And then obviously you have Michigan taking on Alabama. Washington just took down Oregon in the Pac-12 championship. Michael Penix is up there in the Heisman voting, although Jaden Daniels basically just ran away with it because Washington beat Oregon. You would think that Penix would be right up there with them, but Jaden Daniels is having a historic season for the LSU Tigers. That's going to be a really good game. The committee put together a pretty good matchup with that one. And they also, for some reason, I wonder why, they put Alabama and Texas on opposite side of the brackets. And there was a ton of debate over, well, if it comes down to Alabama, Texas, then okay, you got to change something. We got to figure this out. Head to head, does that matter? And now they're giving both teams a chance to get into the national championship, play each other, and solve the debate. And we get a rematch between them. Washington, Texas, you have Ewers versus Penix. It's going to be a phenomenal game. These two teams did play in the Alamo Bowl. Washington came out with the win 27-20. These two, again, they've seen each other before just this past season, and we've seen Washington win. This is a very different Texas team. It's a very different Washington team. That Texas team was 8-5. This isn't the same exact squad. It's a very different squad. Worthy's great. This is a phenomenal offense, and they've been playing well. This defense has also done what they do. But this Pac-12 has been strong. And to see a team finish as well as they did in the Pac-12, Washington, has been phenomenal. I think Washington has played much better competition. They're undefeated for a reason. And for what it's worth, Texas is going to have to play SEC football soon. And Washington is going to have to play Big Ten football. So that's going to be interesting. I am not too sure who's going to win this game. We're just going to kind of put viewers out there for these ones really quickly. Washington, Texas. I feel like Washington would come out with a win on that one. You have to go with the undefeated team. You have to go with the better quarterback. You have to go with the better receiving core. Romeo Dunze and McMillan and all these guys. I don't know if Texas has the secondary to stop this offensive unit. It is just phenomenal. And if Washington, all these teams get a full month of rest, basically. So I'm ready to watch Washington. I'm ready to watch this team go out, put on an offensive showing. And I don't think it's going to be easy by any stretch of the imagination. We might get a very similar game to what we got Michigan TCU, which was a phenomenal one just this past year. And you're going to get something like that because of how the offenses are just so strong in this one. It's going to be tough. I think Washington just has much more offensive talent. I don't know if they, neither team has the defensive talent that's really going to shine. I mean, they got good defenses, obviously, but these offenses outshine their defenses. So that's going to be fun. It's going to be a fun one. We're going to go Washington in that one as our champion over there in that bowl. And then you have Alabama, Michigan. And the number one team in the nation, the Michigan Wolverines, they don't score a ton. You've got everything going on with Jim Harbaugh. You've got everything going on there and over there in Ann Arbor. But you've got the Alabama Crimson Tide, who now have a lot to prove. They got in as the fourth team in the nation. And everybody is saying they don't deserve to get in. They should have put Florida State in. And Alabama has a chance to prove everybody wrong, to make sure that, no, the committee did get this right. They should have got in. If they beat Michigan, you can't debate You can't sit there and say Florida State should have gotten in. I mean, if Michigan loses to Alabama, the debate ends for the rest of time, especially if Alabama goes out and wins a national championship game. If they get put in and they win the whole thing, there is no debate anymore. There's a video that I found interesting. It was Michigan reacting to the final selection of the college football playoff. They were reacting to the selection show. Obviously, they didn't have much to worry about. They knew they were going to be number one, unless if, they thought maybe they'll be number two because of the win against Oregon from Washington. They beat them twice, by basically a better schedule, especially at the end of the year. Obviously, they have the win over Ohio State for Michigan, but Alabama, Michigan was shocked to see Florida State not get in. And I think Florida State would have got waxed by Michigan. I do think this is a better game at the end of the day, whether, what no matter what we think is more deserving. This is a better football game at the end of the day. Unless if you thought Florida State's defense was great, then by all means, definitely have that discussion. But I think Alabama, they are scared of, Michigan's scared of Alabama. Based on the video we saw, they were like, whoa, we're playing Alabama. They thought they were going to have a cakewalk against Florida State. No, you got to play Bama. You got to play Bama that just beat Georgia. And if they can beat Georgia, I think they can beat Michigan. I think Michigan's going to get the first taste of an offense that can really score, as well as Alabama did. And I don't know if this is going to be close. I don't know if it's going to be a blowout, but I can see Alabama coming through with this one, especially if McClellan is going to stay healthy and they've got the running back core that they have. I think Alabama, yes, obviously the Iron Bowl happened. I think we're all kind of still reeling from that. We're all wondering, is Alabama really that good? They lost to Texas. They played poorly against USF. They played poorly against Auburn because they almost lost to the Tigers, but they won those games. Florida State won all their games, and I'm sure that that's going to, that whole logic with Alabama is going to upset the Florida State faithful. But the committee made the decision they're going to play, that they're going to play Michigan. And it's based on this offensive prowess. Jalen Milroe has really improved. And yes, Michigan's probably the best team in the nation. But Alabama, this is Nick Saban's best job if he goes out and wins a national championship game. I'm going to give Alabama this win here. And then you have Alabama, Washington. Who knows? Washington, Alabama goes out, wins a national championship game. Wow. It's very possible. I don't know if we realize how possible this truly is. Now, I want to see Alabama, Texas. That's what I want to see, because if we get that rematch and the discussion of, all the debates that we've had over the past few months, weeks, whatever, Alabama needs to, not months, but past few weeks, Alabama, you can't put them in over Texas. But if Alabama goes and wins a national championship game against Texas, what do you got to say? That'll do it here for this episode of Break Panel Sports. I've been John McCouch. Just had to come on and make sure that I got my thoughts out there about this college football playoff selection, because, oh boy, it was a heated one. It was an interesting one, and it brought about a lot of debate, a lot of discussion. But at the end of the day, the games are the games. Why play the games? I don't even know anymore. But they're going to play some games. They're going to play the college football playoff, and you're going to get Florida State playing for a national championship. You have 2 national championships this year, which is awesome. Florida State, Georgia, it's a national championship game. Let's accept that. Let's understand that. Let's treat it the way that it is and what it is, and accept it for what it truly is. Okay? But it's going to be fun. Regardless, these are going to be some great games that we have on our hands here. That's all I got to say. Let's enjoy our 2 national championships this season. Let's enjoy the games that we do have, because whether you think that they're not the games we should have, it's what we got. It's college football. We're still going to watch it. It's still going to be a lot of fun. But that'll do it for this episode of Break Panel Podcast, Break Panel Sports. We will see you another time.